Hi parents, my name is Jeanette Loxo and I'm a speech language pathologist at Valencia High School. And this is
Hi, I'm Amanda Dykstra. I'm a speech language pathologist at George Key School.
And I'm Heather Taylor. I'm a graduate student intern from Chapman University.
So today, the three of us are going to go through some speech and language development for parents to help support them with their students during this time while they're learning at home, and to help give parents a deeper understanding of their child's language milestones.
Okay, sorry, next slide. Okay, so there are 4 reasons to communicate. The first reason is to refuse, second to obtain, 3 for social reasons, and 4 to provide information.
So the first reason to refuse, a student would express discomfort, they would protest or refuse or reject something. So what that could look like is your child saying no, or it could look like whining or turning their face away. Or pushing something away. So any kind of gesture or vocalization or symbolic refusing or language refusing, all of those would be would fall under the category of refusing.
So second is to obtain. So this means expressing comfort, continuing action, obtaining more of something. This is mostly involved at the more beginning stages of development, is choice making. So what I do with a lot of my students is I have 2 objects that they really like. I have it in front of them, and then we work on this function of communication, which is obtaining, and have them basically choose from 2 items.
So this could mean they're asking for a specific food that they like, or a toy that they like, or even a video or an action like being picked up and held, or tickled, or watching their favorite show. So the third reason to communicate is for social interaction. And this is a big one for a lot of our students. This reason for communicating could be to attract attention, to get attention, to show affection, to show that they're interested in you or a friend or anyone else, to offer or show things, to direct attention, and to use polite social forms. And so this can look like making someone laugh, or if they got a really cool toy, showing the toy to someone so that they kind of have that shared interaction. This is really important for building relationships and friendships and building that social closeness.
So the fourth one is gaining information or requesting information. So first one, answering yes and no questions, asking questions, naming things or people, and making comments. And it's important to note too that a lot of these are at different milestones in development. So naming things or people is an earlier stage. This can be done either verbally or identifying people in pictures. And then asking questions and answering yes and no questions are typically acquired later in development, starting around 2 or 3 years old.
So there are lots of ways to communicate those 4 reasons for communication. Kind of like I said with the refusing, you can communicate with body movements, and typically that can look like reaching or turning away, with eye gaze, looking at the thing that you want. Early sounds like babbling, facial expressions like a big smile or a kind of negative facial expression to show pleasure or dislike. Gestures like this, meaning come here, or arms up to gesture that they want to be picked up. Sign language. So for example, like simple signs like this for more or all done. abstract symbols, which would look like braille or tactile symbols, or picture symbols that look like this. Words, phrases, or sentences, and that could be oral communication, words and phrases, like if they want a banana, saying banana, phrases, I want to eat the banana, or AAC with technology like switches or a GoTalk, or like a static communication board, or using an iPad. And then concrete symbols would be pictures of the actual thing. So a picture symbol would be like a symbol like this, or a picture of an actual physical banana would be the concrete symbol.
Okay, so next we're going to go over the 7 levels of communication and kind of talk about how kids can access that level as well, and how they typically communicate at that stage.
And these are pretty developmental. So the first one is pre-intentional behavior. So what that means is that the child is communicating with their behavior, but they're not intentionally using behavior to communicate. So what that would look like is a baby crying when they need their diaper changed. They're communicating that they need their diaper changed by crying, but they're not necessarily thinking, I need my diaper changed, I'm gonna cry, and that's gonna make my mom change my diaper. It's a pre-intentional, so it's more the child just does it, and then they understand that the consequence will be the change in the diaper. So the parents interpret the child's state from his behavior, such as body movements, facial expressions, and sounds. So if a child is smiling or laughing, they would interpret that as that's something that they like.
So, and it's all interpretation as well. So the child isn't necessarily making that connection between cause and effect yet. So they're not really understanding that when I cry, that is communicating to another person that I need to be fed. It's more of just a reaction to their physical state.
Yes.
So next stage is intentional behavior. This is when the child's behavior is now more intentional. So it's under the child's control. But she does not quite understand that if I do this, mom or dad will do that for me. So they're just kind of starting to learn that I have control of my behaviors, but it's not necessarily that they're making the connection between the cause and effect yet. So parents at this stage have to continue to interpret the child's needs and desires from their behavior, such as body movements, facial expressions, vocalizations, and eye gaze. But the important factor at this stage is that although they don't understand cause and effect yet, they do have control over their behaviors, which they don't at the initial stage.
And then the next stage is unconventional communication. And so in this stage, the child is pre-symbolic. So they still use behaviors to communicate, but it is intentional. And the purpose is to communicate their needs and desires. So the reason that they're called pre-symbolic is they're not able to use any symbols. And so a specific word would be considered a symbol. So the child wants to eat the apple or the banana, instead of using the symbol of a word, banana, they might gesture or use a different modality to communicate. And they can't necessarily yet understand the correlation between a picture symbol, a word, or a sign to request the thing that they want, but they're still able to intentionally ask for the things they want without symbolic communication.
Yeah, so I see a lot of kids at this stage, tap on someone's shoulder, that kind of thing, use more body movements to communicate rather than actual, like Jeanette was saying, symbols, which include words or pictures. So the next is conventional communication. The child uses pre-symbolic behaviors intentionally to express their needs and desires to other people. Behaviors used to communicate are pre-symbolic because they do not involve any sort of symbol. So these are behaviors such as pointing and nodding yes. So conventional gestures, meaning that they're pretty much easily understood by others. So pointing is a really important one. This is when the child starts pointing to gain attention or acquire an object. They start nodding their head yes and no. So they're not using words at this point, and they're not using sign language or any other symbolic language. So this is still pre-symbolic. They're just using gestures at this point.
And so the next level is concrete symbols. So this is where symbolic communication begins. And so they start with the concrete symbols that actually physically represent an object. So that could be a miniature version of an object. So for example, if the child wants toilet paper, they might have a miniature like piece that represents toilet paper, or they might have a part of the object like the toilet paper roll. Another example of this could be an actual physical miniature of a toy that they like. And they get, or like a shoelace to represent a shoe. So either like a miniature version or a part of the object that they're requesting, but they have to have that really important concrete understanding that the symbol represents the object. Anything to add, Amanda?
Nope, I think that sums it up. And then it also includes like picture symbols, like she said, object symbols, and iconic gestures, such as like patting a chair to sit down. Those types of things are included as well. The next one is abstract symbols. So the child uses abstract symbols such as speech, manual signs, or brailled or written words. So when you think of abstract, I just like to think something that's not literal or physical. So physical being like a picture or that type of thing, where it kind of takes a next level of understanding. So speech, for instance, that's when you're verbally producing language, and then you're understanding also that the words that I'm producing are actually, they have meaning, and again, relating it to that cause and effect. Sign language is at this point too, braille and written words. So again, it's taking something abstract, which is basically a symbol, and then putting meaning on that symbol, which is kind of just that next level of development, because it's not as literal.
So this might be an example of some symbols that are abstract. They don't actually, it's not a photograph of an actual thing, but they're symbols to represent an abstract concept.
Yeah, so the previous stage was more physical objects, like Jeanette was saying, miniature objects to represent the real object, or pictures to represent the real object. This is even taking it a step further, where there's symbols, like the letter A representing apple, those types of things, where it's taking it a step further, where you have to have a certain level of understanding to know that this symbol represents a word and it has meaning.
And then the next stage is language. So a child can combine symbols or words together and start to learn and understand grammatical concepts. They understand that the meaning of a word may change when it added to additional symbols or grammatical concepts. So for example, if a child says, "I will jump," they know that that's in the future. And if they say, "I jumped," they know that that's in the past. So that's an example of adding those grammatical markers to help them produce and understand language. And then also longer phrases. So let's go out, or I want to eat. So those longer, multiple symbol and word phrases.
Okay, so that's the end of our presentation. Is there anything else we wanted to add?
I think it's important to understand that when a child has a behavior, they're still communicating, and that's still an important and valuable thing to look at and honor. And I think that if a child doesn't necessarily have the developmental understanding of abstract symbols, for example, the understanding of picture symbols on Proloquo or some sort of static board or AAC, they still have the ability to communicate by other means, and those are important for parents to understand and value.
I agree. And another thing I wanted to talk about too, so especially in regards to AAC, so we've got our 4 reasons to communicate, refuse, obtain, the social aspect, and then information. Especially with AAC, refusing and obtaining are 2 of the biggest ones we really focus on because they're highly motivating, especially obtaining. That's a huge one for AAC, whether it's pictures or an eye gaze device or an iPad. Like giving the child the power to obtain something that they want, whether it's food or a TV show or a toy. That's super motivating. But there's different, I think it's important to understand too that there's different levels of each one of these, and they're more important to some students than others. So what we see a lot with kids with autism, obtaining and refusing is really, really important to them, but the social piece is not as important because that's just not as big of a motivator for them. So it's also important just to remember that we also need to validate the students' feelings and thoughts. We need to teach them how to communicate all these things, but ultimately leave it up to them, and give them, just advocate for their own desires and needs.
Yeah, and kind of jumping off of that, the best way to support functional communication is to figure out what your child is interested in and really likes. And if a child is really, really motivated by socially interacting, then that's what we want to focus on and surround their communication around socially interacting. If your child's very, very motivated by obtaining access to a specific video or a specific toy, that's what we want to focus on. So it's so important to really, really hone into your child's interests and make communication really positive and reinforcing, because that's going to help us get the biggest bang for our buck with intervention. We want kids to be excited, motivated, and really, really have practice communicating surrounding things that they're interested in and really like.
Agree. Anything else you want to add or talk about?
I don't think so. Thank you so much for tuning in. And if you have any questions, please email me or Amanda, and we'll be happy to address any communication questions and concerns.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Have a nice day.